All right. I
Welcome
recognize
to
it.
Porch Play Chat, sponsored by the American Association for Promoting the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately called IPA-USA. IPA-USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association. You can find more about IPA World at ipaworld.org and more about IPA-USA at ipausa.org. I'm Deb Lawrence, and I'm the president of IPA-USA. And as part of our efforts to promote play, we've introduced Porch Play Chats. These are conversations with people who are just as passionate about play as we are. You can find all the Porch Play Chats. They are free to you on our website, on our Facebook page, and on our YouTube channel. So if you go to ipausa.org, up in that top right-hand corner is our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube links. Become subscribers, and magically every Monday morning, a new Porch Play Chat will appear in your feed. If you'd like to see the old Porch Play Chats at ipausa.org, go to Advocacy, Porch Play Chats, and there are 3 years of Porch Play Chats. They are all over 100 already and already published for you to view and use as training opportunities. So today, I'm happy to introduce Nadiyah Taylor. And Nadiyah is the chair of the Early Care and Education program at Las Positas College in California. She's a former preschool teacher. She's focused her professional life for the last 25 years on supporting educators to implement an anti-bias approach in their programs. She's married to a preschool teacher of 30 years and has 1 adult child and a 9-year-old. Ooh, that's a big space in between them.
Yes.
Surprise!
Yeah. That's another
I was
story.
a surprise. There was only a 10-year gap, right?
Yeah.
So with my mom and in my family. So Nadiyah is going to talk to us today about anti-bias education and play. And so Nadiyah, can you talk to me about anti-bias education and how it's connected to children's play?
Absolutely. Hey, so I'm really happy to be here, and it's Nadiyah.
Nadiyah.
And
Nadiyah or Nadiyah?
Nadiyah.
Nadiyah, got it.
Nadiyah.
Nadiyah.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. I told you.
No worries.
I'm old.
I know how it works. So the way that I see anti-bias education being connected to children's exploration of the world is that young children come into the world really primed to learn about their environment, who's in it, what are the things that are important to understand, how do I start to understand my place in this emerging world, right, that as infants and children begin to engage in. And so part of that process, right, is children beginning to as they learn more about themselves as individual people, beginning to then have some thoughts and opinions about themselves. And of course, at the same time, beginning to have thoughts and opinions about others. And so anti-bias education really fits quite nicely in that process, because what anti-bias education supports educators to do is to help children have language for some of the things that they're noticing, to support children to ask critical questions, make critical observations, and then of course to give them tools when they begin to start to use language around things, noticing things not being fair, right? Which begins to happen pretty early in children's lives. And so, all of this can be done quite playfully in an emergent way, following the children's lead, and also at the same time providing opportunities like in other forms of emergent curriculum, where we may offer some invitations also to children, for children to respond to. But I felt like this was an important topic because for 2 reasons. One, because we all know that play is in some ways under siege, or people don't understand the role and the importance of play in the learning and development of young children. And also because I think even though anti-bias education has been around really since the late 1980s, I find when I'm working with teachers and with my own college students, there is still a little bit of a misunderstanding
Mhm.
about anti-bias education, and a sense that, are we going to be lecturing to 3-year-olds
Right.
about, race or gender, right? And so helping folks to be able to see that, play is the way that children engage with the world. And so as we are providing opportunities for children to have interesting materials to respond to,
Mhm.
as we're listening to their conversations with one another,
Mhm.
with a critical ear to see if there are some inherent the beginnings rather of understanding maybe about unfair behaviors that happen in the world and among relationships with people, that
Mhm.
as uh, guides of children's learning and participants in their play, we can begin to support them in thinking about these topics
Well,
so
and
that they're not kind of left alone.
I hear teachers all the time saying, "What do I say?"
Hmm.
when the boys say to the girls, "You can't play in blocks because you're a girl," or the child, the Caucasian child says to the Black child, "I don't want to play with you," or "I can't play with you." What I think that's the tension that teachers experience, and they're just sort of taken aback. I think, at least I hope they are, taken aback by those comments from children, and their response. It could be this visceral response, right, based on their own experiences. I think it's that response that we need to help them with, right? It's how do you respond to those comments that they have probably heard at some point in time in their short lives, and they're just repeating them, right? So that work, I think, is the hardest part. I don't think the hardest part is to make sure that we have photos of different skin colors in the classroom, and that we're respectful in the way that we are discussing children's identity, unless you have a child who might be transgender, and then I think people are like, I don't know what to do with that either, right? And so I think it's those kinds of conversations that people need support in how to handle. How do you work with your students and work with others to be able to navigate those conversations?
Absolutely. I would just want to add on that I agree that in some ways, thinking about the classroom environment can be one of the easier pieces of anti-bias work, right? Assuming that we've done our own internal work,
Right.
because sometimes what will happen is if we haven't done that work, we may inadvertently be portraying an internalized bias
Mhm.
through our choice of curriculum materials and classroom materials. Um,
Absolutely.
and so
Especially in the books that are on the bookshelf. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes.
absolutely, and it's
Mhm.
and we have all been socialized and ingrained
Mhm.
um, in a number of different ways around a number of different topics, right? And so I guess the start of my answer that I tend to say with teachers and with pre-service teachers is it is the internal work, right? It is about understanding, as you mentioned, like, well, what would it trigger me
Mhm.
for if a child said a particular thing, and why would that be triggering? Um, what wouldn't trigger me that maybe should trigger me?
Mhm.
What am I sort of oblivious to?
Mhm.
What do I need to understand about the experiences of the children and families that are in my program? How do I get information ahead of time so that I can begin to wonder with the families? What are their goals around their children's identity development?
Mhm.
What are some of the unique circumstances of their family structure?
Mhm.
um, Even things like if you're working with young babies, who does the baby sleep with someone at home? Are they put to sleep in their own bed? Are they fed? Are they carried? All of these things are ways that that culture and messaging is transmitted to children.
Mm-hmm.
So assuming that we have, and this is always a journey, right? So the questions that we ask ourselves are going to change over time and deepen over time. And as you mentioned, right? So for many folks working with transgender families or transgender youth, or children who are just curious and questioning around
Mm-hmm.
sort of their gender and kind of gender constellations, as some folks are working and calling that idea. And so there's new work for all of us to do all the time.
All the time.
Right. But in answer to the specific question that you asked, one of the things I try to remind folks, especially those who are already working with
Mm-hmm.
children, is to remember that you're not starting from zero, right? Children ask us difficult questions all the time, things that throw us for a loop.
Mm-hmm.
And so, how might you respond to, I don't know, what's a question that, where do babies come from? Right. So for many new teachers of young children, right, when the child asks you that question, at the first time they ask you, you might feel quite stumped. Right. But then eventually you begin to have a repertoire of how to respond. So you might say, oh, tell me what you know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I might ask the child for more information.
Mm-hmm.
I might think about how I respond in simple language,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the age of the child.
Mm-hmm.
I might engage another child in the conversation with them to see what they know.
Mm-hmm.
So some of it is remembering that you have teaching competencies already.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at anti-bias work, what the difference I hope is that people are just it's like putting on contact lenses, right? You're just seeing the world slightly differently, so that when you are talking with children, the ways and the questions that you might choose to ask, or the ways that you respond, are both layered on the foundation of strong teaching that you have,
Mm-hmm.
and then adding in this extra piece.
Yes.
So that's the first thing, is I try to remind people that you're not starting from zero, and it's okay to take a deep breath before you answer.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend who jokes, and when we do workshops together, she'll say, my friend Tara Fleming, she says, well, do you know why when a child says something surprising, you ask them, oh, so what do you think? It's for critical thinking, but it also gives you a moment to pause and freak out in your mind and go, oh my gosh, what am I going to say?
What am I going to say?
Right. So it's okay to pause. It's okay to tell the child, wow, that is such an interesting question. I really need to think about that. It's okay to say, I actually don't know the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
How about we discover it together?
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to make a mistake and then come back to the children the next day and say, there was the conversation that happened in the block area yesterday where child A said, I don't think you should play with those blocks because you wear a dress and people who wear dresses don't get to play with blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happened, I got really nervous and I didn't know what to say. And so I didn't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I had a chance to think about it overnight, and we're working together, we're sitting in our circle time together. So let's talk about that. Are there some things that you think that people who wear dresses are not allowed to do?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And stimulate the conversation amongst the children. And then always being able to return to the values that you have as a school, as a family child care home program, wherever the setting is, being able to say, one, people have lots of different opinions about how, in this case, maybe boys and girls should act. At our school, though, we want everybody to always have a chance to explore all the materials, because all materials are so much fun. They help us learn. We want to be able to try on new things. And so maybe when you're in another place, girls don't do that. But in our classroom, girls get to do everything and boys get to do everything. Right. So you're always, I believe that you should always be thinking about the age of the children that you're working with, obviously, right? What's going to make most sense to them. It's really helpful to do some pre-thinking about, which is, I just want to honor, is like, it's difficult, right? As we all know, that our teachers at whatever age group they're working with don't ever have enough time to just sit and think and reflect about what's going And depending on the environment, they may have already some expectations of standards or curriculum or things like that over which they don't have as much control.
Mhm.
However, we always have control over our own thinking. We have control over the way that we choose to create relationships with children, and we have control over the way that we want the emotional environment to feel in our classroom,
Mhm.
right? So we want all of the children to feel safe. We want all of the children to feel visible
Mhm.
in that learning environment. We want all of the families to feel safe and seen and included in that environment. And so I think if we can continue to remind ourselves of our values as a program, remind the families of the values of the program, and consistently remind the children that our goal is to always act out those values in our program.
Mhm.
That provides a consistency of messaging, and that can, of course, be aged up or down, right,
Right.
depending on who you're working with.
Well, and I think the beauty of what you said is that teachers don't always have to have the answers right then. In my classroom, when I'm teaching a curriculum and assessment course, they're coming up with some study topic that they're going to write their curriculum around that's based on children's interest and in their environment, relevant, meaningful to them. And they'll ask a question and I'll say, that's a great question. You should look into that. Constantly and continue. I mean, it's like parroting back and forth. It's hysterical. And finally they'll say, I know, that's a great question. I should look into that. And I'll go, yeah, you should look into that because I don't have all the answers, right?
Right.
You have the brains to find the answers. And I would be interested in knowing the answer to that. So
Yes.
it is that you don't have to have the answer to every question.
Right.
And I love how you said, something happened yesterday in the block area. And I was sort of taken aback and I wasn't quite sure how to respond, but I thought about it so that they have that reflection model of you don't have to answer right away. And that I think the best thing that you said, well, I don't know if it was the best because there's been many, but an important thing that you said is, well, what do you know about that? Right?
Right.
Because sometimes children's perceptions are based on the culture that they are raised in. And I love how you said in this, people have different ideas, but here, because they can learn the difference between the rules at Nana's house and the rules at home and the rules at school. And so
Absolutely.
this is another opportunity to sort of say, here, everybody is welcome and everybody can play with all the materials and everybody is accepted. And I think those are important learnings for children to hear about this classroom and this space so that they do feel safer. When I was a Head Start teacher many moons ago, the very first thing I said at Circle was, my job is to keep you safe because these children were in very vulnerable neighborhoods. And so that you could just almost see them take a deep breath, that they knew that this was the place where they could be safe. And so I think it's those reassurances that children have that build that level of trust where you can have these kinds of conversations that may be different from what they may be hearing someplace else, but are done in a way that's not disrespectful to those other places where they're hearing
Right.
things, which is really important for family engagement. But also let children understand that it's not always that way. There are other ways to think about something. So let's keep going because I thought that was amazing. Let's just keep going, Nadiyah,
Okay.
because I think this is an important topic and people have lots of questions about, especially since we have some states that are,
Yeah.
doing things that make a teacher's job even harder when children have questions, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I wanted to make sure that that was part of the conversation. I had the opportunity to be taught by Louise Durbin Sparks, who is one of the authors of the original anti-bias education book, and have had the chance to work with her and Julie Olson Edwards and Catherine Goins over the years. And Um, you know, one of the things that really stood out to me the most when I was first learning about anti-bias education is someone said, all education has values. All education is values based. We just don't typically identify what those values are.
Mhm.
So if you think about it, no matter what, someone is making a decision about what curriculum is important, what
Mhm.
materials are important, what should we talk about, what shouldn't we talk about.
Mhm.
And so we sort of, I think in education, we writ large can say like where there's education and then there's some kind of special stuff that's like identity based or values based, but actually all of it is. It's just the
Yeah.
question of whose identities and values are promoted, who's get to be seen as the right kind of values, the quote unquote typical values, normal values, and which ones are seen as not okay.
Mhm.
So when I first began teaching, I was very nervous about um, how people would respond to me. I am a Black woman. I was, at the time I started teaching, quite young and probably looked even younger. Um, I worked in communities where I was often economically less, I had less money than the folks that I was working with sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, and I will also say that, doing my own internal work, I realized that I was born in 1971, and a lot of the folks who were key in the civil rights movement that I learned about
Mhm.
had just been assassinated a few years
Right.
before I was born.
Mhm.
And so I think deep within my psyche for so long, I had a fear that if I spoke up too much, I could be killed because that happened
Mhm.
in the experience of people who've tried to change the world. Right.
Mhm.
So I am very, um, I can understand quite deeply when a teacher says, well, what if a family gets mad? Or what if I lose my job? Or what if, I don't know, there's a community uprising that says, why are you all talking about race with 3-year olds?
Mhm.
Um, and so I understand that viscerally. And then what I try to offer to folks is um, be clear about your values,
Mhm.
understand child development,
Mhm.
and be ready to explain to someone who has a question why you're doing the thing that you're doing,
Right.
right? And this is so appropriate for play because so
Mhm.
much of what teachers have to learn how to do is to be able to make make opaque what is what's happening for children when they're playing.
Mhm.
And so the second journey for those of us who engage in anti-bias work is to right alongside that make it clear what children are beginning to notice and pick up in the world,
Mhm.
and to be able to relay to a family member, if a child says this thing, I don't necessarily assume that that's coming from you as the parent, because
Right.
I understand socialization, right? Children exist in the world. There's all kinds of stuff that influences them. And also, children are little scientists.
Mhm.
So they take one piece of information and another piece of information, and they come to a conclusion that none of us might want them to come to, because they're kind of looking at what evidence is in front of them, and with their limited understanding of kind of how things work, they're coming to conclusions. So I have definitely had families who got angry with me and questioned why I was talking about certain things. But one thing I would say is it doesn't happen very much.
Mm.
That's the first thing. The second thing is I think that I was able to really honestly respect that this person had a different, um, potentially a different set of beliefs and backgrounds
Mhm.
than myself. I also really believe that all children should be loved and represented and made visible and whole. That my little piece of society, that's what I'm going to do my best to make happen
Mhm. In this classroom, in this
in this
program.
classroom. Right.
Yep.
I may not have a huge sphere of influence, but I believe all of us have a sphere of influence. That might be in our family, our community, our faith place, wherever. Right. And so within my little sphere of influence as a classroom teacher, I was able to and willing to hold the tension.
Mhm.
So, because on the one hand, our code of ethical conduct says we shall not harm children.
Right.
And much more evidence is present now than when I first started doing work in 1993, that social emotional damage is harm.
Mm-hmm.
Racism is harmful. Sexism is harmful. Homophobia is harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And so if my job as an educator is to not allow harm to come to children,
Mm-hmm.
I have a responsibility to all the children in my program, even when one family has a very different set of beliefs than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm willing to live in that gray tension. So on the one hand, I personally believe strongly that all children should have access to all classroom materials,
Mm-hmm.
as the example we had earlier. I have worked with families who initially were quite concerned, like, no, that feels uncomfortable to me. It might feel uncomfortable to me because maybe in an unexamined way, that makes me worry that maybe my child is going to have a sexuality that I don't understand or don't uh, personally think is okay.
Mm-hmm.
It may make me uncomfortable just because in my family of origin, gender roles are very defined.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want my child to come home and kind of push boundaries with me in a way that doesn't make me feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's in the anti-bias education book, there's a talk about creating a third space. There's my space. Every child should be able to do what they need to do. There's
Mm-hmm.
your space that says, I really think my child needs to stick within these particular gender boundaries. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's this middle space.
Mm-hmm.
And so the third space is where the only way we get to that third space is if I legitimately respect that what that person is saying is truthful and meaningful to them. And I legitimately respect that what I believe is true and meaningful to me and has some child development background behind it and social research behind it. And
Mm-hmm.
so how do we merge those two things?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How do I say to that family, okay, so what I think I hear you saying is that in your home, boys and girls have different roles, but both of those roles are important. And you feel that if I'm doing whatever in the classroom, that I'm undermining that message at home.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can we do in the learning space that can be in that middle role, right? Because you're going to have your home life where you get to reinforce and say, well, at home, blah blah
This
blah blah
is
blah blah
what
blah,
happened. Mm-hmm.
right? And I get to say at school, this is what happens. But because I'm responsible for your child as well as for all the other children, how do we create something that is livable to both of us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't. Dramatic play is often a key touching point. And
Mm-hmm.
part of the dramatic play being a key issue is because as teachers, we bring our gender bias into dramatic play.
Yeah.
So we have very gendered clothing.
Mm-hmm.
Children love to play with material,
Mm-hmm.
sequins, beads, belts, hats. So we can create an environment where we get what we want out of dramatic play, that's why we as the teachers have to understand what is the role of dramatic play. Is the role of dramatic play really to dress up like a firefighter? Or is the role of dramatic play to try on different social roles and experiences?
Right.
Well, if that's the role, I can get myself out of this gender conflict with this family because we can do other stuff
Mm-hmm.
and still achieve the creativity and the joy and the play in the dramatic play area, and step out of that one particular argument around gender.
Mm-hmm.
I am still going to have to reinforce to this family that my job is to support all children. And that means that your family has a different idea than this family. So I'm going to do my best to support your idea. And I also have to support this other family. And so, it's not always going to be 100% compatible. Like everybody gets exactly 100% what they want. But I do believe that we can hold to our values. We can support all children in their identities,
Mm-hmm.
and we can work through these difficult things. But I do not want to minimize that we are in a very challenging time in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It is not only the United States; it's actually around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have to take some hope from history, that as humans, sometimes we do really unfortunate and painful things to each other, and then often
There's a
a key
tipping
piece
point.
there's a
Yeah.
tipping point. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the one of the things that I should have said at the very beginning is that, in my opinion, what makes anti-bias education substantially different and more impactful is the last two goals of anti-bias education,
Mhm,
which are, we help children to notice what is not fair,
mhm,
and then we help children to act on making things more fair.
mhm.
And so as adults, there's a lot going on, but the way that things change is because those of us who want to continue to make things more fair continue to fight.
Right.
And we allow children to also continue to fight.
Mhm,
So I have a friend who, and I don't know how much time we have, so I'll make this short, but I have a friend who was working with 4 year olds, and they just decided they were noticing, the children were hearing a lot about the environment and how our world is maybe in danger. And so
mhm.
that creates a lot of fear.
Oh, yeah.
And so as educators, right, we have to figure out how to soothe the fear. Um, and one way to do that is to help children to understand that they do have some agency.
Mhm.
And so let's talk with the children about, well, what can we do to help make the world a cleaner, healthier, safer place? Can everybody do the same thing? No. Do some people have different resources?
Mhm,
Right? That's where the teacher can come in, because the child might say, well, everybody should always only buy glass products.
mhm.
And then the teacher can say, wow, that would be a really amazing idea. Do you think that there's some families, though, because glass is pretty expensive, some families might not be able to afford glass products. Is there something that that kind of family could do? Right. So we bring in the subtleties of these other social dynamics
Mhm.
through the process of helping children to sort of, as they become more aware of things not being fair, then we help them to begin to think about how we make things more fair, and we weave in the complexity with the children as they work through that process.
Well, and the beauty of that is that, again, it's not always one way, right? There are many ways to help the environment. There are many ways to work as a community in the classroom. There are many ways to interact with families and be respectful of both your values and beliefs and the program's philosophy, and the family's values and beliefs and the program's philosophy and their values and beliefs and their culture. And finding ways that are respectful to both sides, where you feel like you are doing what you should be doing in a classroom, but understand a family's hesitancy about one. And I have a story about an 8-year-old who loved dresses and dress up. Now, we had male clothes and female clothes, but he loved dresses.
Yes.
And his dad was a big athletic guy. And I had just been in the school age classroom, and he had a hat on and a dress on and high heels on, and dad came in, and I put myself in front of dad, and I said, Jason is currently in a dress, high heels, and a wig with a hat, and you will be okay with that. He said, what? He's got a dress. And I said, come into my office. And so we went in and sat down, and I said, he's just exploring. It's, you need to let him get through this, right? He needs to be able to, other boys do it all the time. It's, the clothing is available. We allow them to wear whatever they choose to wear. And dad, he was red in the face, he was breathing, ready to blow up. And I said, so why don't you just sit here and let me get you a cup of coffee or some ice water, and I'll let you know when he's done. But we're not going to rush him through this process. And dad was like, well, and I said, and you're not going to talk about it on the way home. You're going to say, so, how was school today? Your normal questions,
Mhm.
but do not talk about him being in a dress. And I said, he needs to feel comfortable in this exploration. And finally, it took about 20 minutes, and Jason got out of the dress and the high heels and put on, I don't know, a firefighter's costume or something. And I said, okay, you can go in now. He's in a firefighter's costume. And I said, he was just exploring. And dad seemed to be, he took a deep breath and he went in. And I said, are you okay? because Jason needs to be okay. And he said, I'm okay. And I said, okay. And he went, but it was a tension. And I didn't go into as much detail as I should have with him, because he was so viscerally reactive
Yeah.
in the thought that his son was, in a dress. But he laughed about it with me several times after that. He said, I want to thank you for not allowing me to spew what I was going to spew if I had seen him in a dress. And I said, it's a discovery. He's exploring.
Yep.
That's what children do.
And I just want to offer how wonderful that is that you did that, right? Because another piece of making anti-bias work is we do have to have administrators
Mhm.
who are willing to, as you did, engage with that family
Mhm.
to really hold value, right, to what you were believing,
Mhm.
and to, in a very, like, you did it in your own way, right? Another director may not do it in that exact same way, but you intervened and you said, hey, I know this is going to be a trigger. Want to let you know that I see it. We're going to talk about it. You're going to be safe.
Mhm.
I'm going to respect what you got going on. And I'm also going to really hold the respect that we need to have for children.
Mhm.
Right. And and at least in my experience, what I find is that when families have a visceral response, it is a response typically of fear.
Mhm.
And as we know, cognitively, when we're in fear, we're not really able to process all that well.
Cognitively, right? We're thinking
Right.
emotionally, right? Or
Absolutely.
even with our midbrain where we're reactive.
Absolutely. And what new research says is that the more our implicit biases come out more
Oh, yeah.
when we are in heightened states.
Mhm.
Right. So you responded in such a wonderful, authentic manner to say that I honor that you're in fear and that you're feeling this. And I just want to let you know developmentally, this is what's going on and your child's going to be okay. And
Mhm.
by the way, because of our kind of society, the way it's set up between boys and girls clothing is more fun. It's
Mhm.
more frilly. It's got more colors. So everyone's drawn to it.
Mhm.
Right. And so your child is just exploring.
Mhm.
And so, having all the layers of your program in whatever way it is set up so that the families know what they're getting into.
Mhm.
The teachers understand
Mhm.
what their values are. The teachers are given professional development and support.
Mhm.
And you, as the director, come in. And then very last thing I just want to say, because I think it's a misunderstanding, is sometimes people think that anti-bias education is only for marginalized groups. It's
Right.
only about the Black girls with glasses who are
Mhm.
poor, or something, right?
Mhm.
Anti-bias education says all children have value and their identities are important. The trick
Yes.
is some children have the challenge of being taught that they are more normal and more important than others. And some people are taught that they're less normal and less important than others. And so our goal as anti-bias educators is to make it even. We want all children to feel good. No one has to feel superior and no one has to feel inferior. And that's really what we're trying to achieve with anti-bias work.
And Nadiyah, I want to talk about a future Porch Play Chat in
Okay.
the importance of helping people understand their own implicit bias. Because, I do a whole course on this. The Family, Children, and Communities course is almost
Mm-hmm.
like I feel like I've been in therapy. Like, and I said,
Yes.
I'm not a therapist, but I understand because it is making them see, they walk into the classroom and we talk about bias and, I'll throw a few things out there and they go, oh no, oh no, oh no. And then we do, the stereotypes and, I tell them no filtering, no filtering. You see the word, you write down your immediate response. There is no filters. And they are appalled and then we do role play with scenarios with children and families. And
Yep.
they are like, oh my God. I said, listen, I am old. I've been doing this work for 40 years. I still, all of a sudden, these horrible thoughts fly through my head. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm startled that even after all this work, it's still there. And I said, so we really have to understand how our culture has influenced us, whether it's the culture in our family with the TV shows and the cartoons that we watched, whether it's the conversations our family had at the dinner table, whether it's conversations that we had at other friends' houses. It's our experiences are deeply embedded. And in as much work as we think we've done, it's still there. And so the important thing is to recognize that it's still there, and that you really have to be cognizant when those horrible thoughts fly through your head. And so I think that's a really important next conversation for us to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
I'm going to close this out. Don't go anywhere.